Very good. So, everyone see that screen there? We're on the wrong screen, of course. There we go. It's the screen we're supposed to be on. Sorry about that. Okay. So today we're talking about ACG benefits. We're talking about the personal and business planning benefit of the benefits program. This is less of a traditional benefit in that it's not a product per se, like some of the other benefits that we discussed, but it's more of a assistance or we can offer and things that we're kind of wanting to educate about. So let's get right into it. Today, like I said, we're talking about personal and business planning. As you know, this is, let me back up, I'm sorry. My name is Ian Ellis. I am with Wealth Management Strategies. For those of you who haven't been on a webinar before, we are the official partner of the ACG to manage and assist members with the ACG Member Benefit Program. And we are pleased to be a part of it. We've worked with ACG for 2-3 years now on this and just finally got it launched this year after a lot of time spent designing with ACG leadership as well as with negotiating with some various carriers and whatnot. So, but today we're going to talk about personal and business planning. In the past, we've already done some webinars on the other topics. We talked about high limit disability insurance, the physician life income plan, which is just kind of a personal supplemental retirement savings program. We have a company retirement platform. That's something for 401ks or 403bs. We talked about group benefits. That's going to be your typical dental and vision, as well as long-term disability, short-term disability, group life, all the things that you can offer through the practice as an employer to your employees. And then we also talked about the online financial portal. By the way, anyone who requested a registration for that, my understanding recently is that we had those requests were not being routed to the right place. And so none of them were being honored. I apologize about that, but we do have them. We have located all of them, and we're going to be getting those out next couple of days here. So if you did submit that request, we did get it, and we just didn't know we had it. So I'm very sorry about that. Okay, so let's step back into what we're talking about today, personal and business planning. Here's today's agenda. It won't be very long. Again, it's not a product necessarily. It's more of kind of a resource for the members. So we're going to start with a quick introduction. And we're going to talk about 4 different topics. One is, and these are broken up into kind of what we call some of the common mistakes or common problems or misconceptions of thought that would cause planning problems for clients and for physicians. First problem, there will be plenty of time for that. We're talking about asset protection, estate planning, and things that need to be done early and so often are left for later, and that sometimes no one ever gets around to them. And then we're talking about retirement planning. Those are the 2 topics we'll cover there. The next piece will be that will never happen to me. And I think that you obviously probably know what we're talking about there. This is risk, right? We're talking about risk planning. So we'll talk briefly about personal risk planning and about business risk planning. The third section here is my practice is my retirement. So we're going to talk a little bit more about investment diversification here and the importance of that, as well as some business exit planning. The final section here will be someone is handling the retirement plan. That gets to, obviously, when you have a practice, you have a center, you have a surgical center, you have some sort of operation with employees, and you're offering some sort of retirement plan. The question here, do you really understand what that plan is, how it works? You know, are you maximizing what its potential, and do you understand the liability that comes along with it? And is that liability being properly managed? So if I'm speaking too quickly or you're having trouble hearing me, please let me know. Again, the audio equipment is a little bit different today. So hopefully I'm coming through clear. Again, along the way, if you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and stop me. Just through in a Q&A and they'll pop up. I apologize we don't have the ability to do audio questions during the webinar just because of the number of participants and attendees that may or may not be on the plan or on the webinar. But if you have questions, shoot me a note. All right. And then finally, we'll touch on what the ACG offering is and what you have access to, as well as we actually won't be doing applications of practice in this particular webinar because it doesn't really apply to this benefit, and how to get more information and a quick Q&A. Okay, but like I said, Q&As along the way, please let us know. All right, so today's objective, making you think. This is just the introduction here, but my point in this slide and what we're trying to say here is that I'm not going to be able to go through all the planning today. This won't be a comprehensive planning session where you'll be able to walk away, with your plans. Okay, this is an opportunity for us to spend a few minutes together and plant some ideas in your mind that you need to be thinking about. Hopefully, you already are. You may go through this by the end of today and say, "I've got all that covered. I'm in good," and that'll be good. You'll be in a pretty good place. This is just a sampling of some of the potential concepts you should be thinking about. There are certainly plenty more that aren't covered here today. But this just shows you the type of thing that we can help you with. And again, if you need help with any of these things or something else, our advice is please seek out either your advisor, if you have advisors that you work with. Make sure you're doing this and do it early. I know you're busy from the time you started med school through whatever stage you are in your practice. Your life just gets busier and busier. But these are important items, and there are some significant consequences if you don't take the time to do this planning. So that's why we want to highlight it. And then again, if you don't have advisors or you're looking for second opinions, we're here for you. As the ACG partner, we're happy to provide any advice, any thoughts and comments we can for you. This doesn't come with strings attached or anything like that. We're here for you as a resource, okay? So I'm just going to give a few examples. The important point, planning is personal and unique to your circumstances, right? So we can't possibly really do a large group webinar like this and highlight detail in the planning because your situation is not the same as your neighbors. And so it takes more time discussing the details of circumstances to come up with actual plans and actual solutions. But this is some beginning ideas. And then planning takes time, right? It's not the kind of thing we can do in a single session here. So let's dive into it a little bit. Okay, the first one here, there will be plenty of time for that. This is something that I think we've all said about various things in our life, but most commonly, this is often said about asset protection and estate planning. I think one of the reasons this happens, especially with our physician clients, is that, my brother-in-law is a physician, and so I've watched him throughout his medical school residency and career and whatnot, and watched him, how busy he's been. And I realized, and we've realized through working with our clients as well, that when you're super young and you're still in med school, you're broke, you're tired, you don't have any time or money. So the idea of asset protection or estate planning is the furthest thing from your mind. And you're probably single, maybe you're married, maybe you have one or two kids, but usually your family is small, your assets are small. And from that point on, it's a 1,000-mile-an-hour race, and it never seems to stop. And so finding the time to step aside and say, I need to plan for this doesn't happen until these assets are very significant. And sometimes it's much later than it should happen. And it's an important thing to do early on because the planning you can do early is a lot more flexible than planning if you're planning late. Okay, so let's talk just a couple brief questions to get you thinking. A lot of these you probably have already thought about. But do you have a will and trust? It's a basic concept, right? Do you have your last will and testament? Do you have a trust set up? What's the difference between a will and a trust? Just briefly, most of you probably know this, but just in case. A will is just a document that says what you want to happen with your stuff if you were to die. However, that is just a guideline document, so you know. When someone dies, if all they have is a will, or if there isn't a will, your entire estate, everything you have, goes to probate court. That's where the state and the government decides what happens with your estate, your assets, all of your the things you own. If you have a will, they'll use that will that you've written as a guideline. Sometimes they'll follow it. They feel there was a problem with the will, though, they can choose not to follow it. Or if someone were to come up and challenge a will, they can do that in court, and they can hire an attorney. In any case, even if the will is followed and there's no challenges, you still have to go through the probate court process, and that costs money for your heirs. Whoever's left to deal with your assets if something were to happen to you has to go through that probate court process. You have to have a probate attorney, and that can cost easily 3 to 5% of the assets of the estate. So that can become fairly expensive. That happens in all circumstances unless you have a trust. And this is where we get the difference between a trust and a will. A will is a document that just gives the court guidance about how you want your estate to be distributed. A trust, on the other hand, is a separate legal entity that owns the asset, and it skips the probate court process. So anything that's in a trust, it's owned by the trust, doesn't go to probate court. So proper estate planning, when it's done correctly, nothing will go to through a probate court. So your heirs, your beneficiaries should not have to hire a probate attorney, should never have to go to court, never have to deal with any of that stuff if it's done properly. Because what we do is we create the trust, you fund them, or you put the assets in the name of the trust, and you create a will, and in that will, it says, my intention is for everything to be in this trust, and anything that I forgot to put in the trust, automatically please put in the trust. So it helps us to overcome that probate court problem. That's the difference between a will and trust. Now, a lot of people stop here. A lot of people think this is estate planning. I've got my will and my trust. They don't get into the details of estate planning, which we won't get into too deep today, but we'll talk about a couple more points to consider. But they also forget a couple of important things. You got medical directives. You've got child care directives. What happens to your kids if they're minors and something happens to you and your spouse? What happens if you're medically incapable of making your own decisions? Who's making decisions for you? So some of those types of things need to be created also when you're doing your estate planning, and they're things to not forget about. Okay, a living trust, which is what most people are used to. And then there's what's called an irrevocable trust. Do you know the difference between the two? And if you don't, you need to, because they're an important part of estate planning. That trust we just talked about, where you're doing the kind of a basic to avoid probate problem, that's a living trust. It allows you to put things in the trust and take things out of the trust, move them back and forth. It doesn't really do anything to your assets when you're alive. It's as if you own them yourself. And then when you die, the trust takes over. An irrevocable trust is different. An irrevocable trust is one that allows you to avoid estate taxes, right? So a living trust does not avoid estate taxes. Estate taxes are what happens if you have a large estate when you die. Today, the estate, that size of estate is very big before you have to worry about estate taxes. Who knows what it will be in the future? But as of today, it's a fairly large exclusion before you have to worry about estate taxes. But if you are worried about estate taxes, if you own a practice in a surgical center and significant assets in a home, and maybe rental properties or two, they can build up where you do have some estate tax problems. That's where you start thinking about irrevocable trusts, not just living trusts. And often what we see is people created a living trust and a will and a child care directive like they were supposed to when they were early on. But as their assets have grown, they haven't gone back to revisit their estate plan. And so they could have some estate tax problems that could be easily handled through trust work, but hasn't been because they didn't need it when they started. Okay, so that's one reason it's important to always be reviewing your documentation and make sure you have a team of advisors working with you on that. So are they properly funded? This is your trust again. When I mentioned earlier that we take your assets that you want in the trust and we put them in the name of your trust. This could be your house. It could be your vacation properties. It could even be your cars, although we usually don't bother with cars. Large significant assets, we start putting the living trust as the owner, or an irrevocable trust, depending on the estate planning we're doing. So that's an important piece too. Lots of times, very often, people have created the trust, they created the will, they think they're done, and they never bother to change the name of the house and put any of the assets in the trust. So you essentially have an unfunded trust, which is often difficult to enforce, and so you could be back in probate problem after all. So you need to know if your trust is properly funded. You need to know, are your documents reviewed? Are they up to date? Trust law and estate planning law changes all the time. So if you created your estate planning documents, 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, odds are planning has changed and trust law has changed. For example, 10, 15 years ago, we created a trust called AB trust, in which when someone dies, the trust would split itself into two trusts. This was to avoid certain estate taxes. It's not really necessary in today's environment. You don't need an AB trust. And so it complicates things unnecessarily. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad or they're going to create problems for you, but you should update it if you have that type of trust. So these are the types of things that are important to keep pace with. And then, are your assets protected from creditors and lawsuits? This is important. And the reason this is a whole separate topic from estate planning. Everything we talked about right now, wills and trusts, that's estate planning. Now we're talking about asset protection, and it's different. And the reason it's different Is it your will and trust? Oh, don't have it on there. Your will and your trust don't handle this. If you have your home and your vacation properties or whatever else you've got in the name of your living trust, they are not safe from creditors. They are not safe from lawsuit. They're not safe from any of those types of situations. You get a big malpractice suit and it exceeds the insurance limits, they could come after personal things. And if they do that, if you don't have them properly protected, and they're just in a living trust, then those could become game. Now, let me a little side note here. Make sure everybody understands, I am not an estate planning attorney. I'm not an attorney at all, or a CPA. So all of the things we're talking about here, I'm not intending to give you direct guidance to go do this work. It's things to think about, and you need to sit down with an attorney to do these things and to address them, to ask the questions. We have people that we work with that we're happy to connect you with, or talk to local counsel if you already have counsel, or if you've got other friends in the area that have counsel that's local to you, and they know them and trust them. Find someone you can trust. Sometimes someone you like, an attorney that you can talk through these issues with. Okay, so back to what I was saying when I had about asset protection. You're obviously, as a physician, you're in a higher liability industry, higher liability profession. Now, as a gastroenterologist, that liability may vary versus others, but there is still liability there, and you obviously have your insurances to try and handle as much of that as possible. That's also important to start protecting your assets. It's not only from liability from work, though. Someone could slip and fall at your home and crack their head open and decide to sue you for it. So it's just the litigious world we live in and the high liability world we live in. It's important to do as much of this type of protection and planning as you can. So that was a quick note to make sure that everybody understands asset protection and estate planning are not the same thing. Having your trust, your living trust set up and your will set up does not protect your assets from creditors or from lawsuits, okay? Do you have a team of trusted advisors? This is the final point on this one, and I've already mentioned it a couple of times. You need people to help you with this, right? Some of the advisors, CPAs and attorneys especially, typically will cost money. Yes, it costs money to have meetings with them and to get documents set up. It's not that expensive to set up the basic, a basic estate planning package. It shouldn't cost you. The bottom end is going to cost you $2,500, to $5 or $10 grand probably. If you have some really complex estate issues, then it could get more expensive. But in the grand scheme of what it's saving you and multiply your beneficiaries, that's the important things. Okay. So get a team of trusted advisors. Financial advisors usually won't charge for their time on some of these things, but then they charge them with some of the planning stuff. So retirement planning. Okay, we're skipping gears a little bit, but this is still part of this. There's plenty of time for that. And the reason is retirement planning is something that so many physicians fall into the same thing that I talked about earlier. They started out when they were young and they didn't have any money, and then you started out and you actually had a paycheck, but you've got quite a significant amount of debt to pay off. So you're working through that, and you're probably participating in your 401k or 403b or whatever program's available to you, and that's really all you can afford to do at that early stage of your career. And then all of a sudden you turn around and you're 45 or 50 and you haven't done much actual planning. Now you're saving, and that's good. Hopefully you're saving for retirement. If you're not saving retirement, and I'll reach through the phone and smack you. But hopefully you're saving something. But have you really planned for it? That's the question here. Do you know when you plan to retire? Have you picked an age? A lot of people say 65 because it's the default. Is that really when you want to retire? Some people want to retire earlier than that. Have plans and other things they want to do beyond retirement. Other people plan to work much longer than that. So you need to think about it and know that age. Do you know how much income you'll actually need? This is one of the biggest questions that a lot of people can't answer. And more importantly, this is kind of the second part of this question is, do you know how much money you'll need when you retire to generate that much income? Because you generate your income now, obviously, from working, but the day may or may not come, when you aren't going to be working anymore. So then all of a sudden, all of your assets have to be generating the money for you. And the income you'll need will continue to inflate over time. So today's $200,000 of expenses This could be $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 by the time you're 80. So it's important to know that number. How much do you really need to have set aside? Where's your income going to come from, right? Social Security? Probably not, at least not very much of it. You got a retirement plan, but if you're maxing out the qualified retirement plan limits, you're putting away 18 to 24,000 a year, depending on your age. And that's not going to be enough to replace your income if you're making $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year. So what other assets are you setting aside and starting to build up to generate this retirement income that you're going to need? Some examples here. Do you have a practice you're building, you're going to sell it? If you're going to sell it, how are you going to sell it? Who are you going to sell it to? Do you have other investments you're building up? Real estate you're building, you're trying to invest in? Those types of things. And then are you on track? And this is a part of having an advisor again. Not saying it has to be us. We're here for you if you want our help. But find someone, help you project these things. There's a lot of complex questions that go into a proper retirement plan. Find someone to help you to sit down, ask the questions, do the math, put numbers together, and build a plan that you can track and monitor to see if you're on pace to keep up with it. And if you're going to exit a practice, how? You need to think through these things. And you've written these things down. How will your exit be structured? And those things are changing these days. There are less and less percentage of it. I shouldn't say this necessarily. I don't know this statistically to be the fact. This is what I'm being told by clients. There are fewer and fewer young doctors coming out looking to buy practices with debt. They're looking for other ways to do buying programs, internal buyout structures, or they're going into the hospital systems where they're getting their debts paid for them and then they're just living on a salary. So there's a lot of different things to think about and decide if you're really able to rely on it. Okay, the next thing here, that will never happen to me. We're going to talk a little bit about personal risk planning and business risk planning. This is my favorite picture here. So we think we know what the risks are. We know we could become hurt or disabled. We know we might die early, but they don't seem like that big. They don't seem very likely, right? The risk doesn't seem that big. But understanding what happens beneath the surface, understanding what are the implications if that happens, not just the obvious ones, but what are all the extenuating circumstances, the extensions, the additional complications for my life or the life of my family if one of these types of risks happens. So first, under the business risk planning, and I think my text has gotten switched around a little bit here because it looks like we're going to go through business risk first. But business partner risk. This is primarily buy-sell planning. But this is the type of thing that happens. What happens if you're in a partnership or you're in a practice with multiple partners? What happens if a partner dies? Right? That partner has built up some sort of equity in the practice. I'm assuming that they are going to want their family or their heirs to benefit from the value of the practice or their portion of the value. Have you planned for that? And if so, how? If there's a buyout plan in place, and this often happens, there's a buyout language in the entity document. So in your operating agreement, your partnership agreement, there's language in there about what happens if a partner dies. And the other partners either will buy them out at current value or they'll buy them out over a period of time or something like that. But that's often where it stops. What planning have you done to fund that, right? If a partner dies, if there's 5 of you in a practice that's worth, call it $2.5 million, someone's got to write a $500,000 check, right? So that becomes complications. So think through the funding of those agreements. And they don't just extend to death. What happens if your partner becomes permanently disabled and is no longer able to perform their duties? They haven't died, and you may have had, and sometimes people even go to the extent they actually fund the buy-sell agreement. They get life insurance, which is super important, and one of the first ways to fund a buy-sell agreement. But it's only part of the conversation, because what happens if the partner is disabled? So now life insurance doesn't pay out because the partner's still alive. They're disabled, so they can't work anymore. They're not generating revenue for the business, so you can't keep paying them. But they own part of this business. What are you supposed to do? So that's where you get other things you got to start planning for. Whether you're going to use disability insurance for them, whether you're going to build up a fund for it, whether you're going to have a buyout structure over time, however you want to decide to do it. There are lots of ways to do it. This is something that's important to think about. Okay. Overhead risk. This is both for you, your partners, anything that we're talking about here is what happens to your practice if something happens to one of your partners relative to revenue to overhead ratios. So if you have a two-partner practice and you lose a partner, are you going to lose half the revenue, or maybe you're going to lose a third of the revenue? Some big chunk of that revenue is probably going to disappear. Is your overhead going to disappear? You probably still have the same office. You probably still have the same staff, or most of them. Maybe you let go of one nurse or two nurses, but a lot of your overhead still exists. Your insurances all still exist. So your expenses don't go down necessarily anywhere near as much as your revenue might go down if something happens to one of your partners. So have you planned for that? Do you have insurances in place for that? There are such things as business overhead insurance. So those are the type of stuff to think about. Another thing is that and this is an obvious one, and everyone has already thought about this to some extent. You've got general liability, EPLI. EPLI stands for Employment Practices Liability Insurance. So anybody that's got employees, you should have EPLI risk insurance, and lots of people don't. And covers things under employment law that you could become liable for. So just to make sure that you're thinking through all these things, and you've got an advisor that you're talking to about them, right? And there's probably a couple advisors, some crossover here. You got some financial advisor and some insurance portfolio advisor, and you got some commercial insurance in here. You need to be talking to both of them. Fiduciary risk. So this falls under things like benefits that you're offering your employees, your health benefits that you're offering employees, your retirement plan benefits you're offering employees. Do you understand the fiduciary role you as a partner take when you're offering those types of things? And are you kind of preparing for them, and are you documenting properly to cover yourself in the event that something goes wrong and someone gets upset? Because those things do happen. Okay, let's dive quickly into personal risk planning. And again, please stop me if I'm going too fast. I'm trying to get through it quickly. I know you guys have busy nights and things to do. So we are recording the webinar. You can go back and watch it anytime. You can reach out to us anytime as well. But if you do have something along the way you want me to stop, please do throw up a question. Okay, personal risk planning. So this is some of the obvious ones you know about. Disability planning. I know most physicians are very good about having disability insurance, at least at some level. If you've watched our previous webinar on disability insurance, it goes into depth about the different types of disability insurance that's available and the opportunity to have insurance that actually covers your income, which most traditional disability plans don't cover enough for physician incomes. They give you maybe up to $15,000 a month of benefit. So there is a program available through the ACG, as well as other programs outside the ACG, that can give you access to higher limits, but you just need to know about them and where to get them. Death and estate planning, we talked about that a little bit earlier, but it's important to make sure you have those things covered. And there's several different things to cover, right? If something happens to you, you need to have something left over for your family. You may need to have something for your partnership. Those types of things need to be thought through. Long-term care planning. I think we're becoming more and more acutely aware of this, because especially in the medical industry, because we're witnessing it. It's really the first generation of people that a majority of them are needing long-term care assistance and are ending up back living with their kids again, or they're in very expensive care situations because assisted living, memory care, hospice care, those are very expensive. And some of them, especially if you're dealing with cognitive issues and Alzheimer's, can be long-term, very expensive and very long-term. So long-term care planning is important. It's a constantly evolving industry in the insurance component. But there's more to long-term care planning than just the insurance. The insurance is an important part to figure out how you're going to fund it. If I can fund my long-term care and leverage my money, so if I can spend 30 cents for every dollar I would get in long-term care benefit, then it's something to seriously consider. And there are a lot of plans out there that don't require use it or lose it types of premium, like car insurance. It's not where you're funding an insurance policy necessarily and that money's gone. And if you never need long-term care, then you'll never get anything back. There are plans out there that have return of premium types of programs where you fund your long-term care plan, and if you don't use it, you get it back through different either through death benefits to your beneficiaries, which are still leveraged, or you can have them back as cash. You know, you can fund them and then decide later, you know what, I need that money. I don't think I need a long-term care insurance, so I'll just take my money back, and you can get your money back. So those things exist, but you got to know about them because you got to start asking the questions. Sit down with the advisor to go through that stuff. Child and elder care planning. This is an important thing. We talked a little bit about the child care. That comes to what happens if something happens to you. That's what I'm talking about there. What's going to happen to your kids? And there are different parties to think about. Who's going to take care of your kids physically, emotionally? Who's going to be the one that they live with, as well as who's going to be in charge of their financial affairs? And those two people aren't always the same person. Sometimes they are. Excuse me. Let me drink of water here. Usually those are the same people. Okay, everyone see my screen? I'm just seeing a strange pop-up here. It looks like you can't see all these images. That's concerning. So you're now seeing an image of an iceberg. But were you able to see the iceberg before this, or did it just come on? I'm very sorry if it looks like I may have missed those previous slides. They're all just as beautiful as this one. Let me continue. The child and elder care planning. This is child care planning is something that happens to you. Who's going to take care of your kids? The elder care planning is when you start thinking through your own parents. Do they have long-term care insurance, or significant or enough assets to take care of themselves if they become medically dependent on someone else? So if they don't, you need to start thinking about that. And do they have ways that you can start providing for them, or are you going to have to be able to have in-home assistance for them? Some of these things are things to think about, because lots of our parents didn't plan for this because their parents didn't need it. And so, like I said, it's kind of the first generation going through this at a large scale. And so many of this generation are not prepared financially for it. So it may end up resting on you as the children. Okay, we'll keep going here. So just real quickly, I'm going to back up through these slides that I was on previously. If I could get somebody to just pop a quick Q&A note in here. Did you guys see this slide? Or have you been staring at a blank screen the entire time? If you have, then I apologize. But we went through this slide, and the agenda slide. So I apologize if you missed all that. It was my mistake on running the presentation. No one's cute. No one's popping in any notes. So either I've bored you all to sleep, which I hope is not the case, or it's working fine. I guess I'll know when I go back and see the recording. Okay, let's talk about the next piece here. My practice is my retirement. This is the concept of you spend your life building a practice, building something of great value, and the hope is that someday that will be how you retire. And in the past, that has worked. And what has happened is you sold your practice to a new doctor, or a few new doctors, or your existing partners that you build up over time at different stages of their career, and you're bought out when time comes. Like I said, more and more I'm hearing from our physician clients that's becoming less common and more difficult. We do see practices getting bought up inside medical systems, but we also see lots of young doctors that aren't looking to do that anymore. It's not necessarily their plan. So what is your plan? And so our concept here is, the first thing I'll talk about is investment diversification and the different types of things you can be doing to invest outside of a practice. Now, I'm not saying don't invest in a practice, and it's important, but think through other ways you can start to diversify in case your exit plan for your practice doesn't become what you hope it does. So we got traditional investing. This is the quote investing that you hear about all the time. You have an asset management account or a brokerage account. You do it yourself online. You have an advisor, somebody, somehow, some way, you invest this money in things like the stock market or the bond market. And that money goes up and down with the market. It's not a bad way to invest. It's usually taxable depending on how you're doing it, but it's certainly one good way to stay liquid, which means have easy access to your cash when you need it. But get your money invested, get it out of just a bank and just savings, so you can hopefully earn something on that money and keep up with, or possibly even hopefully beat, inflation. Another thing to think about is ancillary business lines. And I think that you're probably pretty familiar with what I'm talking about here, but this is, you may have a GI practice and then you open up an endoscopy center or surgery center, or you may have seen several of our clients that have anesthesia practices to kind of coincide with their gastro practice. So those types of things are great ways to diversify a little bit, because your income flow is not all from one place and from dependent on the sale of one asset or one business. However, keep in mind that they're very correlated. So if something were to happen in the industry or the market, or with insurance reimbursements, those things affect both those businesses typically. Real estate, that's another common way to diversify your assets a little bit, and looking into either owning commercial real estate. Maybe you own the building that your practice is in. Again, there's some correlation there though, but ultimately you're owning the underlying real estate, so there's some value there. There's residential rental properties, which some people choose to manage them on their own, which can be a headache, but some people love it. There are management companies out there that do it for you. There's lots of different things. And with today's technology, there's all kinds of online platforms, lots of ways to do this. Find out what you like best, what you're more comfortable with, but that's another great way to diversify. Insurance as an investment. This is something to talk to an advisor about, because insurance has a lot of unique qualities that can make it a very valuable investment vehicle, investment tool. One of the primary components is the money inside insurance contracts is typically not taxable. So as it grows, the growth isn't stunted by taxation like it is in some other situations. You obviously also have the benefit of leverage, as it is insurance, and if something ever happened to you, your investment account, quote investment account, which you're using inside an insurance contract, would turn into more money for your beneficiaries. Taxation of investments. This is a very important thing to understand, and it is not all the same, as my point in bringing this up. The taxation changes dramatically from one investment type to another. Everything from your 401k to an IRA to a Roth IRA are taxed different. Real estate is taxed different. Insurance is taxed different than regular investment accounts. So all of these things are taxed slightly differently. It's important to kind of understand those things and try and diversify, not just where your money is invested as far as what type of thing, but what taxation vehicle is your investment in, and try and diversify that taxation as much as possible, so that you have multiple types of taxable accounts to draw from when you are deciding to start retiring, and you can start to manage your income tax that way. Because if you're pulling money all from taxable accounts in retirement, then all that money is taxable. But if you've got money in non-taxable accounts, you can start to pull from each in retirement, and you can kind of control your tax bracket a little bit. Some of that planning is important. It's an important thing to sit down with advisors and understand that. So then another big part of my practice is my retirement is that exit planning. We touched on this briefly, but the most important thing before I get to the bullet points I would say about exit planning is something in writing. Write down the plan. Whatever that plan is, get it written down. It can change. Just because you write something down doesn't mean it can't change, but get something written down. So the first question is, how will you transition in practice? Have you thought through it? One of the reasons we make people write it down is it makes you think through it in greater detail when you actually have to write it out, and some of the holes or the missing steps start to become more apparent when we're trying to write down a plan. How are you going to transition that practice? Are you going to transition it over time to younger physicians in the group? Are you going to try and sell it to a system? Are you going to try and sell it to a brand new doctor that's not been in the group? Those types of things. Written plan. That's why I just mentioned that earlier. Do you know what your practice is worth? This is an important question. The question is know what your practice does, not think. Because if something happens to you or it's time to sell, you better know, not think, What's your practice really worth, and what's it worth today? Because it's probably different than it was last year or the year before that. And lots of times people will put plans in place and maybe even document buy-sell agreements with partners and different things like that, but they won't update the valuation. and you put the valuation right there in the document. And then 5, 8 years later, something happens to someone, and that person's family wants the current value for their share of the practice. But if you never update the valuation document may be a 10-year-old valuation. So now you got a legal problem, right? So either you as a surviving partner have to come up with more money than the document says you should, or the person's family of whoever may have passed isn't going to get what it's worth. Or more likely what's going to happen is you're going to end up in court. So there's just the type of thing you want to avoid. You want to know what your practice is worth and update those valuations. There are different ways to do this. You can have a valuation formula written into your documentation. You can actually hire outside valuation consultants every couple of years. However you want to choose to do it, or make sure that your valuation is staying up to date. Buy-sell agreements, we talked about that earlier. That's kind of what happens if a partner becomes disabled or dies or incapable of doing their job anymore. Internal buyout options. So this is probably one of the more common things I think these days. You've got a practice of partners, and these partners usually have a laddered age brackets, right? You may have the partner who's 60, you may have a partner who's 55, you may have a partner who's 48, the brand new guy. So it's intended to allow partners to kind of retire one at a time and allow the remaining partners to be able to support the practice and to support that buyout. And that's fine. But have you got it written down, right? And have you got the intended funding put in place? Because if one of the senior docs leaves, and that's a lot of your revenue, are you going to have enough revenue left in the practice to pay them out and still have enough for all the remaining partners to live on? That's an important thing. And there are other things you can do from a tax planning standpoint that can actually be really advantageous. You can do things like SERP agreements, which stands for Supplemental Employee Retirement Programs. But what it does is it allows you to move some money into a plan, set it aside so that when someone retires and the younger people are buying them out, you can use that money to buy them out. There's all kinds of tax benefits to doing that. But all of that takes planning and takes some discussion, and it's just things to make sure you're thinking through. Okay, last section here. This one is someone is handling the retirement plans. This happens a lot among our physician clients, and that's because you've got usually you've got a practice manager, or you've got an office manager, you've got an HR manager, you've got someone in your office that handles kind of the day-to-day employee type of stuff. You didn't go to school to learn about investments or to learn about 401ks or fiduciary liabilities or any of that stuff. So someone else that just handles it. And that's fine, but it's important that you understand a couple of things about the plan so that you're doing this with your eyes open, and that the person that you're entrusting with this, that you know that they know this stuff. Because there's some important things to understand about retirement plans, right? So the first thing is, are you maximizing the potential? Lots of times we'll see plans get put into place in practices, and they're just kind of there because they figure we need to have health insurance and we need to have a 401k. But it could be a really good benefit if it's structured properly and communicated properly and used properly by the employees. Are you also maximizing benefits for your partners? Just a regular vanilla 401k for, a physician partner making $500,000 a year isn't doing much for their retirement. So there are other types of plans you can be using in combination with a 401k or a 403b or 457 type of plan. You can use non-qualified deferred compensation plans, defined benefit plans, which are also like pension plans, cash balance plans. Are you doing the safe harbor stuff? All these things need to be thought of and checked off. And whether it's you or your office manager who's doing it, you need to be confident that whoever's going through this has done it and done it correctly. And hopefully you've got good advisors. They'll do this with you and with your office managers to make sure this is happening. Fiduciary liability. This is a big one. Do you understand what that is? Does your office manager understand what that is? There's questions you need to be able to answer. And as we go through this process, if any of these questions you can't answer, you need to sit down with someone. That's kind of the point of these slides. If I'm walking through things here and you're like, oh, well, I haven't thought of that, or I don't really know the answer to that question, then you need to write it down and you need to go find the answer, or you need to make sure someone in your office does have it. Okay. So what is a fiduciary? and who in the company are fiduciaries. Now I'll tell you roughly speaking, and this is not going to be the formal legal answer, but a fiduciary is someone who has some sort of responsibility and control over plan assets in a retirement plan. In this context, fiduciary has a lot of meanings, but in this context, that's what it is. Now, most often, that's going to include all partners in a practice, not just the financial management partner or whoever's in charge of the finances or whoever's in charge of the HR. It's all of you. If you're a partner and you're an owner in a practice, you are probably going to fall into the fiduciary responsibility. The other person that lots of people don't realize, that office manager or HR manager or benefits coordinator or practice manager, whatever their title is, that person that's actually kind of doing some of the management of this 401k plan, maybe they're signing documents, maybe they're not, they're probably going to be a fiduciary too. Why does that matter? Why does being a fiduciary matter? Well, you've got liability if you're a fiduciary, right? You have certain responsibilities that are required to be done by the plan and documented. And if those responsibilities aren't being done and properly documented, then you've exposed yourself to some liability here. And that matters because sometimes participants can come back and sue. And that does happen. Not because now maybe you have a disgruntled employee and you get one person that comes back, or maybe you get an attorney who goes out and trolls for employees and or former employees to go back and sue their employers and their plan providers. This happened like crazy in 2008, 2009, 2010. After the market had a huge crash, there were tons of employees that were severely impacted by the market changes. And so there was an opportunity to go in and look at plans. And if they weren't checking off some of the boxes, even though it had nothing to, may or may not have had anything to do with why the employee lost money in the market, if they weren't checking off those boxes, there was liability there and there was someone to sue. So you need to understand what those are. Now, these can all be easily handled. I don't mean to scare you into thinking, oh man, I don't want a 401k. These can all easily be taken care of, right? But it needs to be done. You need to have an advisor that knows what they're doing, and you need to have an office manager or administrator, whoever it is, that knows what they're doing. And they know they've got the right people helping them do it so that you can do all the things you're supposed to be doing to satisfy these. You need to be reviewing and benchmarking your plan regularly. This is reviewing the plan design as well as benchmarking against other plan providers to make sure that you're getting potentially best or reasonable plan for your employees and you're not being overcharged. You need to be benchmarking your investments. Make sure you're having reasonable investments, qualified default investment alternatives, all these buzzwords that we're not going to cover in detail today, but need to make sure that you're doing them. You need to be holding investment committee meetings. Are you holding investment committee meetings? Are you taking notes? Are you discussing the 401k? All those things need to be done. If you have a good team, then they're helping you do this. If you don't, then you've got some exposure. Are your documents up to date, delivered timely? This isn't just the plan document. This is all the documents that have to go out to employees. You know, do they get out within 30 days of the time which they're supposed to get out, or 90 days, or depends on what document it is and what the time frame is that it's required. But all of that has to be documented, and if you got audited, you need to be able to show that that was being done. Okay, so that's why it's important to understand what a fiduciary is and what your responsibilities are. Someone stopped me with a question. Oh, okay, my slides are working. Thank you very much. This from earlier. So that's why it's important to understand fiduciary liabilities. And again, the point of this isn't to scare you. The point of this is not to give you answers to questions. It's just make sure that you know that these questions are out there and you should be asking them, or someone should be asking them and making sure you have an answer. Okay. I'll go back to where I was. Oh, and this is the last question. How regularly are you interacting with your advisor? So you've got a plan advisor. You've got a plan provider. That's going to be the company, right? That's the Fidelity, or that's the John Hancock, or in this case, if you're using the ACG platform, it's AXA. The plan provider is really helping you. They're an important component of it. And they're a lot of the source of the service and the documentation that you need. And your advisor is helping you with the other pieces of it, making sure you're benchmarking your plan and those types of things. So you should know who that advisor is, or whoever's managing your plan should know who your advisor is and have talked to them in the recent past. right? We often come across people who have a plan and haven't talked to their advisor in years, right? So that advisor is getting paid on that plan every month or every year, and they're not doing anything. So that type of situation is something you need to watch for. Okay, so that's it. And obviously that's not it. That's not all the planning you could possibly do. But these are some of the highlights and some of the big topics that we see problems with a lot, especially in our physician clients. That was why I wanted to run through those. Someone else is handling a retirement plan. There'll be plenty of time for that to get your estate planning done. Got to get your estate planning done. You've got to get your asset protection done. You need to think through your own personal retirement planning and in detail, not just be putting money aside for retirement, but go in detail, fill out questionnaires, sit down with an advisor, figure out what you need in retirement. That is so important because there's only a few things we'll almost always have to do. We have to pay taxes, we have to die, and then almost another certainty is retirement. Some of us may die at work, most of us won't. We'll need to have assets. And so you need to understand how much you need so that you can live the life you want to live and you deserve to live and you've worked so hard to live rather than living what you're left with, okay? And then the other planning topics we talked about, they're all important. The ACG offerings, this is not a lot of detail here, but the ACG program as an official ACG partner, like I mentioned earlier, WMS, or Wealth Management Strategies, has agreed to offer our education and our counseling to all the members of ACG in the areas of personal business planning. So most counseling is going to be free of charge if you're an ACG member, for either you personally or for your business planning. That's kind of part of our agreement with the ACG is that we're more than happy to do that and to work with you. There are a few circumstances where, this includes both members and their practices. I think I mentioned that. My point of this bullet point is this doesn't include your second cousin on your wife's side. We are happy to help anyone you want us to help, but the ACG offering is specific to you, your immediate family, as well as your practice. Okay, and then there will be some more complex plans. You know, if it gets complex, it could require fees. Because every situation is unique and individual, we haven't set specific criteria when that was. Most often than not, there's not going to be any fees. If there ever was a situation where we would have to charge a fee, we would tell you up front, obviously, before we did the work. We would never surprise you with a fee. And you would agree to it. We'd have a written agreement before we ever did any work that required a fee. It's a reduced fee. So that was another agreement with the ACG, is that anything we did do that required a fee would be a reduced fee compared to what we would charge a non-ACG client. Okay. Learning more. So this one's easy. Email us or call us. If you have questions, you want to explore some planning, or even if you're not, you don't have to want to work with us on a full planning perspective. You may have your own planner and you may have some questions that you want a second opinion on. We're happy to do that. You may have a planner who's proposed something to you that sounds off to you, or even if it doesn't sound off, you just want another pair of eyes to confirm it for you. We're happy to do that. We're a resource. We're here for that type of thing. If you have some questions here and there you just want to ask, feel free to call us. Like I said, though, we're also happy to engage with you if you want to go through some of that retirement planning, you want to talk more about the business planning, want to talk more about your risk protection. We're happy to work with you on all of those things, and we can help you get connected with the right products and contracts to satisfy some of those needs, either through the ACG program where possible, so through like the disability insurances and the 401k programs and the personal retirement stuff. We can do a lot of that through the ACG programs, which have obviously discounts and benefits. Or if it's not through an ACG, if there's not an ACG program available for it, we can of course get it outside the ACG. And that, as those things happen, it helps us also to know what the members need, that we can try and go get more concessions from providers to possibly bring in as a new ACG benefit down the road. Okay, so here's our email address, acgbenefits@wmsurviving.com. And that's a phone number direct to the ACG benefits advisors. It'll be answered by our receptionist or our machine, depending on what time you call us. And you'll get one of, there's 1, 2, 3, there are 5 of us right now that are dedicated ACG benefit advisors. Any one of us can help you, okay? Q&A, is there any questions? So far, it's been a very quiet Q&A session. I'll assume it's because I did such a good job. But this is the time. So I will stop talking now. You'll hear silence for a few minutes, and we're going to see if you got any questions. If I don't have any questions in a minute or two here, then we will end the webinar. And if that is happening, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me. I know that you got plenty of things to do with your Tuesday evening. If you have any questions after the webinar, let us know. You'll get a link in an email follow-up that should have a link to the recorded webinar series where all the recordings are. The 401k webinar is not up there right now because we had some problems with that recording. We're going to redo that one. So we'll have that up soon too. Okay? Thank you very much, and please let me know if there's anything you need. So someone asked a question here. Would it be possible to find out more information about the different taxation of investments? Absolutely. The question said IRZ versus Roth, et cetera. I'm not sure what IRZ meant. Probably meant IRA. That's what it meant. So I should realize that. So IRAs versus Roth. Sure, I can talk about it briefly right now, but also I think, are going to end up putting up some other educational videos and possibly another webinar. We'll have more detail on this type of topic. But taxation, for the most part, investment taxation is going to fall into 4 buckets. I'm not going to describe all 4 because it's hard to do without a visual. But IRAs versus Roth, for example. An IRA or traditional IRA is kind of like a traditional 401k, where the money you put into it up to certain limits, which are legislative limits, but what you put in is deductible in the year you put it in. So if I make $100 this month, I put 10 bucks in my IRA or my 401k, they work the same. Then my taxable income this month was only 90 bucks. So that was what's called pre-tax contributions. And then as long as it's sitting inside that IRA or that 401k, that money grows tax deferred, which means as it grows, that growth is not taxable. You can move it around, change investments. As long as it stays inside that retirement plan, you won't get taxed on the growth. That's important. However, anytime you take the money out, you're going to get fully taxed 100% at income levels, not capital gain levels, but income levels for all of it, because it was untaxed money that went in, not taxed as it grew, so they're going to tax it all when you take it out. You're also restricted on when you can take it out by age. You can always take it out. The only difference is if you take it out before age 60, technically it's age 59 and a half. I don't know why they use that, not just 60. But if you take it out before age 60, you're going to get a 10% federal penalty. You'll get some state penalties depending on which state you live in, and then you'll still get the full income taxation. So it's a pretty big hit if you take it out before age 60. If you take it out after 60, you just get the full income tax. So that's how a traditional IRA or 401k or any of those traditional plans work. A Roth, the difference in a Roth is when I put that money in, it's not tax deductible the first year. So this year I make $100, I put in 10, my taxable income is still $100 bucks. So I didn't get that tax benefit for putting it in. However, it still grows tax deferred while it's in there. And I can still move it around without creating any tax or triggering any gains. All that's the same. And the benefit of a Roth is when I go to pull the money out someday, none of it's taxable, right? Because it's already taxed going in. So technically that growth never gets taxed. That's the nice thing about a Roth. Again, that's where we can use things like that. Now, Roths are available as in an IRA form, but as hopefully, as you probably know, if you're under age 50, you can only put up to $5,500 in a Roth IRA or a traditional IRA. However, you can also get Roth 401ks too. So your 401k at work, you could do your entire 401k allocation could go into a Roth 401k. It's the same thing. It's taxed the same way as the Roth IRA. Not deductible going in, gross tax deferred, not taxable coming out. So that's the difference between those two types of investments. I talked earlier a little bit about insurance. One of the reasons insurance is used, it's a little bit unique. It works a lot like the Roth does. Not tax deductible when you put money in the insurance contract. It does grow tax deferred, and you can move it around all you want without creating any gains or triggering any taxes. And when you pull the money out, if you follow all the proper rules and procedures, you can pull the money out without getting taxed as well. So that's great. It works just like a Roth. Now, the other advantages to the insurance piece is there is no age restriction on when you take the money out. So if you need it before 60, you can without any penalty. And there's no limit to how much you put in it. I say that with a caveat. There's a limit technically, but it's tied to how much insurance you could qualify for, and that you're going to be limited in the tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars going into the contracts. It's not a legislative limit on contributions like a IRA or a 401k is. So you can put a lot more in an insurance plan, and you're not age restricted on when you get it out. Now, on the other flip side of the coin, it's insurance. So there's still a cost. There's some cost of insurance to owning the insurance contract that exists inside that type of plan that wouldn't exist in the IRA or 401k. But you're getting insurance for that on top of that. The dollars are leveraged. So if something ever happened to you, it would turn into a death benefit for your family. Leverage, your whatever money you got in there, you have more than that would be paid out estate tax and income tax free to your beneficiaries. So those are some of the different taxation types that we're talking about. Okay, another follow-up question here. What is the insurance contract or plan called? Who sells these insurance contracts? Okay. So most insurance advisors have access to some form of these types of insurance contracts. There's actually one available through the ACG program called the Physician's Life Income Plan. It's one of the best ones available, if not the best one available. One of the things you'll find with insurance contracts is most insurance contracts have, and there's a whole webinar on this too, by the way. So if you want to go back and watch the Physician's Life Income Plan webinar, it will have a lot of detail about this. But the Physician's Life Income Plan, most insurance contracts have what are called surrender charges. And those are things where in the early years of the contract, you can't get all your money back. I told you there were no age restrictions, which is true, because that's a legislative restriction that exists in the retirement accounts. But the insurance companies will tag these penalties on early withdrawal in the first 5, 10, or 15 years. And that's because for the insurance company, they need your money to do the contracts long-term for them to make money and to cover certain costs. So if you put it in and pull it right back out a couple of years later, then it hurts them. So they put these surrender charges on them. However, in the type of contract being used in that Physician's Life Income Plan, that does not exist. So you're getting what's basically full liquidity, which means you have access to your money immediately early on in the stage, because those surrender charges through a combination of lower costs and credits and things like that don't really exist, or they don't affect the amount of money you get back out of your contract. It's also what's called a corporate contract. Even though you can individually own it, it's a institutionally priced contract, so the cost structure is different, and it's actually a really efficient plan. So that's what's available to you through the ACG. Outside of that, you could probably get other types of insurance contracts. It would either be a whole life contract or a universal life contract or a variable universal life contract through most insurance advisors. And if your insurance advisor is any good and they know what they're doing, they can explain those to you and the differences. Each type of contract comes with different benefits, pros and cons, as it relates to risk and return of your investment inside the contract. So that's something to discuss in more detail with the advisor one-on-one. If you wanted some more details, we'd be happy to go through that with you too. Hope that answers that question. That was a long one, long answer. Okay, here's another follow-up. If you are a physician working for a hospital, would you be able to purchase the insurance contract, and would it make sense to look at this type of product? Yes, is the answer to both of those questions. So if you're working inside a contract, inside a hospital system, you probably have a 401k or 403b available to you through the hospital. Go ahead and take advantage of that. But you're going to be limited to your contributions to 18 to 24,000 depending on your age. So then what do you do? What else can you do, right? In fact, this is even better for you because if you owned your own practice, you could come up with some other types of plans you might be able to do through the company, but you own the practice, so you can create them. You can't do that in the hospital system. So you really have very few other options. You can't do an IRA because you've already done a 401k, or you could do the IRA, but it's only $5,500 a year. So this is often kind of the next step we go to with physicians in your situation where we look at these insurance contracts. And they make a lot of sense. It just depends on how much you want to be able to fund it into the contract. And we can just kind of build the contract around the funding you want to do. If you want any more details, if you want to look at some numbers for you personally, just shoot us an email. It says acgbenefits@wmsirvine.com. You can also email me directly if you'd like. I'm Ian@wmsirvine.com. That's IAN@wmsirvine.com. And we can run numbers for you specifically based on your date of birth and stuff, and you can start to see what it looks like. Okay. Anybody else have any other questions for me? Looks like that might be it. I will hang out on mute for another minute or so, and if I don't get any more questions, I will say thank you for joining me, and have a great night. Okay, looks like no more questions, so I'm going to say good night to everyone. Thank you again for joining us, and hope to talk to you soon.